Andrew Alston is the CTO of Liquid Labs, the research and development arm of Liquid Telecommunication. Aside from the heavy focus on routing technologies, Andrew writes code, exactly what I've just said, writes code primarily in C, Golang, and assembler, primarily revolving around the testing and implementation of routing technologies as part of the R&D efforts into the latest technologies. Outside of his professional life, Andrew enjoys spending time with family, scuba diving, deep sea fishing, and spending time in the national parks trying to spot some of the more elusive wildlife, which I know have some wildlife here. We're going to find some here. So without saying so much, I'd like to invite Andrew Alston, our keynote speaker. And as he walks to the front, I'd like us to stand up and give you a round of applause.
Good morning, all. Wow, it's morning, and I went to bed this morning at 4:30 this morning after sitting there trying to figure out what I was going to say today. Because in my life and my career, I've presented all over the world. I've presented now in about 113 countries. Most of the time I'm presenting on technical fact, which is objective fact, and it's really easy to do that. You go and put your facts, you throw them in a slide deck, and that's what you present. Today, however, I'm going to be doing something different. I'm going to tell the story of how I got to where I am, and share some lessons over the last 30 years. And yes, I'm only 42, and I did say 30 years. I've been at this for a long, long time, and somehow, even since the age of 12, I've managed to survive this industry. And that'll be part of the lessons that I'm going to try and share with you. I encourage you guys to ask questions as I go. If you've got a question, stop me, put up your hand. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There are plenty stupid answers, and I'm sure I've got plenty of them. But ask, interact, because that way you can get the most out of this. So, I'm going to start this off with a little bit of my story before I start going into the lessons. I grew up in South Africa, in a small little town called East London, halfway between Port Elizabeth and Durban, and it was a really small town. The only thing there is the Mercedes production plant, and if Merck ever pulls out of South Africa, the whole town disappears. I had a father that was academically obsessed. I mean, really, he was academically obsessed. Gifted child coordinator for the country, deputy head of the teacher centre, and it's an interesting thing to note considering what I'll tell you in a little bit about my own academic history. But suffice to say that academics didn't really work for me. I was frustrated, I was bored, and at some point, at age 12, someone did some things to me that I needed to deal with. And there were no adults around that were going to help me deal with that. And I realized even back then, the only way that I could ensure that the individual who had hurt me could never hurt someone again was if I dealt with him. To do that, I needed knowledge. I needed skills. Because I was a kid, I was 12. But I also had a computer. And I had a way to get online even back at age 12. You see, the university in our town had a Yale lock on the door, which means you could come in so long as the door was open or you had a key. But if you didn't have a key, you came in, but you couldn't let yourself out. And the university campus used to shut down at 8 o'clock at night. And everybody would go home. So you walk onto the campus at 7:50 p.m, you go home in the bathroom till 8:30 at night. Everybody goes home, you go into the staff lab, you boot through their security systems, you hack into the Linux server of the university down the road, and you spend all night online. Until one day the senior lecturer comes back at 3 o'clock in the morning and you get banned from the campus for life, until they retire anyway. But I could get online. And at that point, I was driven. I was driven to get to a skill level that would allow me to react and to ensure that what had happened to me could not happen to anybody else. And it became an obsession. I spent the next 10 years of my life studying, learning, and gaining skill. 20 hours a day, that was all I did, that was my focus. 10 years came, I got what I wanted. You'll never hurt anyone again. But there was a lesson from this. And the lesson is that the drive to succeed and the drive to get that skill can come from many places. Some of them can be good, solid places. Some of them can be very dark. But the trick is the drive. What are you taking in your life that is giving you that drive to keep learning? Because this industry is a harsh place. I'm going to be straight with you. This industry, your average burnout time for somebody in senior technical positions is less than 15 years. People burn out. And I'll talk a bit about dealing with that as well. But it requires a passion and it requires a drive. Particularly because you're entering into a very competitive industry. And if you don't have that drive to keep learning and to keep growing, somebody else is going to. And then you're going to find yourself at the back of the pack. That drive is critical. So, moving a little bit from that, I also knew at the time that I had this computer at home, but it didn't have what I wanted. And I needed little upgrades. I needed the latest box of floppy disks to go copy something, etc. But my folks had no money. We did not grow up wealthy. And so I couldn't get it from them, so I went and I banged on every door in that town for every computer shop, everywhere. And I said, give me a chance. Over and over again. And at age 12, I finally found a guy who would give me the chance. And I started working on the shop floor of a place called Network 3 Computer Services. And I spent 3 years working that shop floor once a week on a Saturday morning. I got 200 bob a week, but half the time I told them to keep the money. I just wanted a box of floppies, or I wanted the latest MFM controller, or I wanted this or that. And it was about getting the tech, but it was also about getting experience. It was about building contacts. And then, at about age 16, and I find it very funny that I'm standing in a university and probably going to give all the professors here heart failure at this point. But at age 16, I went, you know what? I need to move beyond this town, beyond where I am, and I need to grow further. So I was sitting in the middle of science class, grade 10, and I started putting my books in my bag. And my science teacher looks at me and goes, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm leaving. She said, what do you mean you're leaving? I said, exactly that. And I got up and I walked out. And I walked down to my dad's office, which was nearby, and I said to him, I need to borrow 200 rand. He said, what on earth for? I said, well, I just quit school. I've organized myself a job down in Cape Town, 1,000 k's away, and I'm out of here. And he looked at me and he said, as much as I disagree with you, I know that I'll never stop you and you're going to do it anyway. So here's the 200 bucks. Good luck, son. And so I got on that bus and I left. And I went down to Cape Town where I started a job as a software engineer. Well, actually it was more a software consultant. We were doing accounting system installations in factories, Specialix, serial done term stuff, etc. And I worked at this company for a couple of months. But here's the thing, 16, alone, in a huge city, I realized that I still needed my family, and eventually I packed up and I went home. And it took me a long time of being at home to realize that moving out into the world was more than about tech skill. It also had to do with an emotional maturity. It had to do with the ability to build relationships. Something that at 16, I wasn't sure that I really was equipped for. I thought I was. But I wasn't really. And it's still taken me a long time to realize that in this industry, you have to rely on more than just your tech skill. Your network, your contacts, your socialization is all important. Because nobody in this industry survives on their own. Eventually, when I left East London again, I'd been hacking for a long time. So you talk about hackers, well, I'm the genuine article. I founded 2600 South Africa. I'm ex virtually every hacking group that you can name, as well as every Wares group and every virus writing group. I wrote my first virus at 13. But eventually, when I left home, I decided, you know what, this is all fun and games, but I actually need to make some money. And here's the thing, the hacking wasn't making me money. Starting a security company did. So I started a company called well, at that point it was Dynamic Network Solutions, which 2 weeks later I sold 50% of to our anchor client, a company called Cytec. 2 or 3 years later, MTN bought Cytec, and they took the rest of the shares. And that was South Africa's, well, that was actually Africa's first IT security company, to my knowledge. But it was, again, a learning experience. Because I learned from that beyond the technical skill, I needed some business skill as well. I had to understand business. I had to understand marketing myself to clients. I had to understand finance. This industry is symbiotic. You cannot get by on a single skill set. You can go and join a company and work as a techie for years. But will you rise? Will you achieve what you want if you're not prepared to look beyond just the hard technical skill? It's a multifaceted industry that forces you to keep growing and learning in a multitude of factors. And I started in security, but the thing I also realized about security at that point was that I was looking at this and I was seeing people attacking the application layer. They were stack smashing and they were buffer overflowing and, well, been there, done that. But nobody was looking at the network. And so that's where I decided to look next. What about network security? And in fact, the first exploit that I know of that was written to attack the Cisco PIX firewall, CVE 2006-13, I believe, was written by me 22 years ago in my first attempt to attack the network stack. And it worked. It was a really, really simple exploit. Basically, all I was doing was exploiting a flaw in the TCP stack, which allowed me to reset their state tables because they weren't doing SYNAC sequence checking on reset packets. It's a simple thing. There was only 60 lines of code. But from there I got into this interest in networking. And after I'd sold my company, I took a bit of a break and then I got bored. Because let me tell you, I don't think I'll ever retire, because I tried it once before and I got really bored, really quickly. And so I took a job at the University of Cape Town, which is kind of ironic considering that I'd quit school. I still have no degrees today, I have no high school. But I had a lot of experience at that point, and so I joined the University of Cape Town's IT department, and one day I decided that I wanted something called IPv6 at UCT. And we knew that we had to get that from our provider, which was TENET, the South African Academic Network. So I went to them and I said, I want IPv6, and they said, well, we're a bulk bandwidth buying organization. We don't have a clue how to do that. You want it, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I realized at that point that there was opportunity for me. I could help them and see where it went. And so I went, while working for UCT, I got UCT's permission to work with TENET for half a day a week or whatever. And I got TENET to buy me a server, which I built tunnels on. And I wrote the IPv6 GRE stuff that is in the FreeBSD kernel to facilitate this, and I got a tunnel up with Géant, and we got our IPv6. But at that point, remember, I was looking for opportunity. So I said to TENET, if you want to become a real academic network for the country, you can't be a bulk bandwidth organization. You have to get technical skill, and you have to build a network. You need a CTO who knows what he's doing. And I have a very pragmatic CEO there, a guy called Dr. Duncan Martin, who looked at me and he said, fine, I agree, write the job description and make damn sure you apply. So I wrote a job description and I applied. Guess what? I got the job. And I spent 8 years as CTO of TENET, the South African Academic Network. And there's a lesson from this story as well. It was about opportunity that I went looking for. Yes, right time, right place. They were a bulk bandwidth organization. They needed technical skill. But they didn't even know it. In your career, as you go ahead, you have to look for those opportunities, and then you've got to make them happen. In this industry, getting ahead, there's a degree of luck to it. Like everything, right time, right place. But you've got to be prepared to take those opportunities and to push them along where necessary. And that happened throughout the course of my career at TENET, actually. We ended up in a situation where South Africa at that point had a monopoly, Telkom South Africa, and Alston decided one day that they were tired of this, and they went out, they challenged this in the courts. And overnight, South African industry got deregulated. That was heaven. At the same time, the CCOM cable was coming, and we knew that we needed bandwidth, and so we, via a long, complicated process as a small 11-man organization, managed to convince the development bank to give us $20 million to put into CCOM to buy bandwidth. At the same time, the South African government had decided they wanted to build an academic network, except they made a mistake. They allocated, which at that point, at the exchange rates back then, was about $80 million to build this network. But it was all in capital. They hadn't allocated a single cent to operationalize this thing. And myself and the CEO of TENET realized back then that this was pure opportunity. They had the money to build the network, but they couldn't operate it because you can't operate without money. We, on the other hand, had the universities backing us, and that meant that we had operational money, but no capital. So we struck a deal with the DST, and we built this network using their money, and then we operated it. The fastest network that the continent had ever seen. And it remained the fastest network for more than 5 years after we built it. Some of the fastest technology, and in fact we took delivery of technology from Cisco into that network that was so cutting edge that they had to ship the line cards with alpha software, because the software for the hardware we were running hadn't even been created yet. And we built that network. It was a wonderful experience. But again, it was about taking advantage of opportunity. Then, after spending 8 years with Tenet and we built this network, I realized something. I am not an operational guy. I was bored. I built it. I don't want to run it. I wanted to build it. I wanted to design it. That's what fun. And so I took another gamble. And this is another lesson. Some of the time you have to gamble. You have to take risk. And I left. And I went out as a contractor. But when I went out as a contractor, what I was actually doing was interviewing potential employers. They didn't know it. They didn't need to know that. I wasn't going to go and apply for jobs because I know nothing about a company that I'm applying for from an advert. However, if I can get a contract from them, then I get to see them and see, does this fit me? And so I took various contracts. One day I took a contract with Liquid. Liquid at that point had just bought out KDN, Kenya Data Networks. And so I took a contract to come up here and sort it out. And at that point I was flying back and forth to Kenya. I would fly in on a Sunday afternoon and I'd fly out on a Friday. Every week for a year. I'd spend a year living in the Serena Hotel. And after a year I realized I like this organization. I can do things here. And so I said to them, you know what? Save a lot of money if you employ me, stop paying hotel bills, get me a house, base me in Kenya. And they went, well, flight savings, hotel savings, okay, here's your job. Again, right time, right place, but I made the opportunity. And that is the message that I cannot stress enough. You make those opportunities. I got that contract because I was standing up at a conference which I was invited to when I was still at Tenet. We were talking about peering. And I got to talk there because I used other contacts to build an interconnection with Tenet to a point where we were the most interconnected network on the continent by a long way, all through the relationships that I built. And then, working for Liquid, we redid the Liquid network in Kenya after we took over KDN. And I built the IP team in Kenya. They're the guys who now run the network. And one of the guys who was working for us in the NOC at that point, a guy called Christopher Mwangi, he's now CTO of Liquid East Africa. He started in the NOC. It didn't take him long. But it was interesting because when I formed the IP team, I said to all of the guys, someone needs to lead this team. Someone needs to manage it. Which of you wants it? And tell me why. And there's another guy who works for us, a guy called Robert Sigay. Brilliant techie. And he looked at me and he said, Andrew, I don't want that job. I'm a techie, and I'm good at it. And I know I'm good at it. And that's where I want to stay. Chris said, I want to go the management track. He said, I'm going to go out and do an MBA, and he went out and he did the management track. Both of them made very smart decisions there. One of the things I get when I interview technical people all the time, and you say to somebody, what do you want to do in 5 years? And he goes, I want to be a manager. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. Because if I wanted a manager, I'd be advertising for a manager. If I want a techie, I want a techie. And if you ever find yourself in that position, realize something. Be the best techie in the world does not mean you know how to manage. That is a very, very different skill set. And in your career path, you need to decide, what do you want to do? Do you want to excel technically and be the best of the best? Or do you want to be a manager? They're different things. I got lucky when I joined Tenet. As I said, we had a very smart CEO. The first thing that he did when I was there is he said, Andrew, you know what? You're good technically, but you don't know much about management. So you're not touching a computer until you do. The next 3 months is the hardest 3 months of my life. He put me through absolute hell and he drummed business into my head. I walked away after those 3 months knowing more about balance sheets and financial statements and you name it that I could ever tell you. And I learned at that point that technical and management are very, very different things. And one of the things I see so often in this industry is companies love to go, here's our best techie, we need to pay him more. So what are we going to do? We're going to promote him, we're going to make him a manager. It's the worst thing they could ever do, because what happens? The techie goes, hey, I'm becoming a manager, more money, I'm going to accept that position. Doesn't know how to do the job. Within 3 months, he's probably fired. The company's lost their best techie, they still don't have a manager, and the techie has just ruined his career. When you're offered opportunities like that, ask yourself, is this what you really want and can you do it effectively? Never be afraid to turn down the promotion if the promotion is a poison chalice. Know your skill set, know yourself. That is some of the best career advice that I can give to anybody, is know yourself and know where your skills lie. I also learned a couple of things from other management that I've worked under. And here are some rules for management, very basic rules. Number one, always hire smarter than yourself. Keep in mind that your team as a manager, and this goes back to the fact that no one can be self-made. But as a manager, your team is going to make you or break you. Your team is not there to do your grunt work. Your team is there to make you look good. And the only way that they're going to make you look good is if they're smarter than you, because otherwise you could do it all yourself. So go out and hire smarter than yourself. And that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second. But here's the other thing about teams in business. Realize the higher up the food chain that you get, sooner or later the day is going to come when someone's got a gun aimed at your head. Life of management. If you want your team to have your back, you better be willing to take a bullet for your team. Because if your team is performing well, as management, it's your job to stand for your team. And I've got really simple rules with my guys. I always say to them, if you screw up, but you told me what you're going to do beforehand, that's on me. I approved it. If you screw up and haven't told me what you're going to do, sorry, there's no protection, because I can't protect you against something I didn't even know you were doing. So it becomes about communication. And I've had instances where we were doing a particularly big project and the project went wrong for a whole bunch of reasons. And the group CEO said, I'm going to cut that entire team's bonuses. And I phoned him. I said to him, no, you're not. He said, I'm the manager. That project sits on me. You are not taking my team's bonuses. I said, you can take mine, give it to my team, take it. But do not touch the team. Why did I do that? Because I need that team. I need that team loyal to me. And this is something I can say as you advance. Again, you are only as strong as the people around you that make you. Your knowledge, you can spend a lifetime in this industry learning. It's never going to be enough to cover it all. It's too vast, it's too wide. One of the other roles that I currently sit in is an area director for the Internet Engineering Task Force. And there are, I think there's 15 area directors in total, 3 of them in the routing space. And our job is to effectively make sure that everything that comes out is an RFC. Anyone here ever heard of an RFC? RFCs are the standards documents that drive the internet. Anything that you do on the internet follows a standards protocol. Those documents are developed inside working groups, and eventually they come to the area directors, and we have to read those documents and approve those standards globally. So you make a change to BGP that Cisco and Juniper are implementing, etc., and you need to change the standard, that goes through us. And in this whole kind of process, I realized that as an area director, I am nothing without the people who are actually doing the work in the working groups. I'm actually the least powerful person in the room, because all I get to do is approve it. They've got to create it. But you learn from these things, and again, it comes back to your contacts. But back to the point about the fact that you can never know everything out there. As an area director, we process around 600 pages of new standards every 2 weeks. Think about that. 600 pages every 2 weeks. I've got an entire routing directorate of reviewers behind me, which eases some of the load. We've got other area directors to ease some of the load. But I can tell you that there are days where I get some of the crypto documents for security, and I look at them and I go, I'm hoping the security ADs have got this, because no object, I can't understand a word of it. I know it. Know what you know, but rely on the people around you. So, so important. Be willing to listen to people who have more experience. Remember something. God gave each of us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should probably be using them in that proportion. And just remember, when you are listening to someone, that does not mean that you cannot disagree with them. But when you disagree, argue from a reasoned, factual, objective perspective. In this game, the science and the objective fact is everything. And I say this to my employees. My door is open. Disagree with any decision I make. But come with the info. Come with the research. Have done your homework, because otherwise I'm going to tear you apart. Otherwise, you can change my mind if you come with the facts. And this is important as you engage and you grow in this industry and you grow in this career. You're going to run into a lot of people who are arrogant, who are narcissists, who quite frankly can be pains in the ass. That's just reality. That doesn't mean they're not worth listening to. Doesn't mean you can't learn from them. And I find this often. There are people that I work with who are some of the most brilliant technical minds in the world. Hands down. But man, I know when I've got to have a meeting with those guys, I'm like, oh God, I've got to deal with this person again. But I'm still listening. And that's something else I can say as you go forward in your career. Your personal feelings about the individuals that you deal with don't matter. What matters is what can you get from them in terms of knowledge. You can despise someone. That doesn't mean he hasn't got something to teach you. And our natural human emotion is that the more we hate somebody, the more we automatically discount them. Because you don't want to say that the guy that you hated is a genius. You want to say he's an idiot. So in your head, you convince yourself that he's an idiot. Don't make that mistake. I have many times. And I'll openly say that. As you build your networks, you're building your network on what can people bring and offer you in terms of knowledge. Here's the other thing about this industry. As I've said, I have no qualifications. And I admire everybody here who's sitting here going through university. I admire the profs who put up with all of you, because man, I don't think any prof would have survived me. I was a nightmare. But your qualifications are a key to a door. Here's the thing. Anybody ever watched a TV show called The Originals? Or any of the vampire shows? Right? Here's a rule about vampires. You can get to the door, but if you aren't invited in, you ain't getting through that door. Your qualifications are very much like that. They unlock the door. But you've now got to convince the guy on the other side to invite you in. That comes down to socialization. It comes down to interaction. It comes down to soft skills. And dare I say it, it comes down to knowing how to play politics. This industry, I find so many techies who go, I hate the politics. I don't want to play the politics. Politics is part of life, my friends. And it's not an easy game to play. But what is politics? It is purely interaction. Here's something else to consider in a cybersecurity vein. When you interact with a computer, what are you doing? You're giving a computer input to solicit output. When you are hacking a computer, you are giving it input to solicit output that the programmer never intended. It's as simple as that. Now let me ask you this. When you are having a conversation with someone, what are you doing? You're giving them input to solicit output. What are you doing when you are socially engineering? You're giving them input to solicit output unintended. You are hacking the human brain. That's what communication is about. Input and output. And so, as you move through and you create these relationships, realize that human beings, at the end of the day, are just computers. Very, very, very fancy computers. They work on input and they give output. It's really that simple. Right? And I realize that people are thinking, oh my God, what's this guy saying? You know, he's implying that you can hack the human brain. You definitely can hack the human brain. The human brain has got some very interesting things. If you look at fields of study like neuro-linguistic programming and self-hypnosis and NLP combined with self-hypnosis, you can make your brain do some really strange things. You can hack the human brain. But in your career, as you're building your relationships and your social networks, remember that. Because as much as you have that input-output relationship, if you craft the input that you are giving incorrectly, you're going to get results that aren't going to work for you. Watch what you say. You know, there are times where I stood up at conferences where people have upset me. And there's videos where I've gone to the microphone and I have ranted at someone. And somebody said, Andrew, but you're not in control. And I said, oh, I am. Because I don't say anything without knowing what I'm saying first. I may stand and rant and rave at somebody, but never without a reason. And the trick is, are they looking at what I'm actually trying to do? Who am I trying to sway? Is it them? Is it the other people in the room? Is it somebody on a remote video stream? Every action, every word is calculated. And that's how you build a network. And that might sound strange and manipulative, but it's not. It's saying it like it is. It's expressing something that we all do every day, but in a more calculated fashion. You see, the thing about this industry is, as you go forward, you have to calculate your moves. When I left school, I see a lot of people who come to me and they go, Andrew, should I leave school? I have all these skills. And I said, then have you got a plan? And they go, I said, have you got a plan? No. And then they said, well, yeah, I've got a plan. I said, you've got a backup plan. And a backup of the backup of the backup of the backup. If you've got all of that in place, fine. But you've got to have a plan. You've got to calculate. You've got to think your moves through. And that's what it comes down to. As you're studying at a university, they're going to give you certain skills. You know what? Those skills are never going to be enough. Sorry, Prof. But I think you'll admit it. You've got to keep learning. You've got to go out there and enrich yourself beyond that. You know, I spent 18 to 20 hours a day for the last 30 years in this industry. I type at 160 words a minute with 100% accuracy today. Because of it, I've had to have operations on my wrist for carpal tunnel syndrome because I've lived, drank, eaten, slept it. And people go, but IT people shouldn't have to do that. Why should I have to do that? And I'll tell you why. Because somewhere out there, there's going to be a guy like myself who is going to do it. And if you're not putting in that work and that effort, the guy who is prepared to put in that work and that effort and is doing so is always going to come out on top. Always. Because that individual is following a process of lifelong learning. A degree, a PhD is a starting point. And there are many paths, right? I believe that academia has a big role to play. I also happen to believe that there are other paths, and I'm living proof of it. Those other paths aren't easy, though, believe me. Believe me. But it doesn't stop on either path. You know, I'm 42 now, and I'm still working 18 hours a day. And I'll probably be working 18 hours a day till the day I drop dead behind the keyboard. I've woken up with a keyboard imprint on my face because I've passed out in front of the keyboard because I was chasing something. You have to find that drive. And not everybody has to work 20 hours a day, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is you've got to be driven to keep learning. And here's something else to keep in mind in this industry. Nowadays, you can go and download tools to scan the network. You can go and download some exploits to test for exploits. You can pull up a computer language and write in completely abstracted forms without actually knowing how the computer works, without knowing how the exploit works, without knowing how the scanner works. You know what? Everyone else can download that stuff too. Where's your advantage? When you download an exploit testing tool, you realize that that's been in the wild probably for the last 6 months. When we wrote something called Smurf, long story, long convoluted story behind Smurf, it was one of the world's most evil DDoS tools. It was never meant to be released. One of the guys that wrote it decided to take our names off it and release it anyway, and unfortunately MasterCard, PayPal, Visa, and a whole bunch of other things went down 24 hours later and stayed down for quite a while. But when we wrote that, we did it because we knew how the network worked, and it took months. In fact, actually it was years before everybody adjusted to deal with that tool. But the cybersecurity guys got it 6 months after PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, etc., had gone down. If you're not out there creating your tools, you're behind the curve. And you can't create the tools by simply downloading something. You can't write code in a completely abstracted fashion without understanding that machine to get the best out of it. You have to strip away those levels of abstraction. And I say this to every student that I ever meet. I'm taking you back to school. I'm stripping away your abstraction layers. Take Python, it's great for scripts, but now I'm going to take you down a whole other path. I'm going to show you what C and assembler and pointers and memory caches are all about. I'm going to teach you IP addressing from a binary perspective so that you can calculate with binary mathematics. And I'm going to go right back to basics. And I said then you're going to hate me for it. The next 6 months of your life, you're going to hate me because I'm going to drill things into your head that you never thought possible. And I'm going to work you. But they walk out of there, the better people. And where did I learn to do all of that stuff? Back when I started, this really tells my age, there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there was no WhatsApp. I don't think that Yahoo existed back then. And in fact, I saw the birth of the first IP stack in Windows when it came out in Windows 95. Because Windows 3.1 didn't really have an IP stack. So I got my knowledge by jumping on things like Usenet, which is the old news network on the internet, something called Archie, something called Gopher, and also by banging on doors and never taking no for an answer. If I saw someone that had information that I wanted, I harassed them till I got it. I didn't care. I would phone and bang on the door and ask and ask and ask. It was a relentless pursuit of knowledge. And you want to get to the top of this game, and you want to be in this industry, that is something that you have to do. You cannot rely on somebody else to spoon feed you that information. You're going to have to go and get it. And you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to fight damn hard for it. You know, it was interesting when I first started programming, it was in Pascal. Anybody here ever written in Pascal? Wow, now I'm feeling really okay. A couple of people have done some Pascal here. But I've been chasing people for information about Pascal since I found it on our computer because my older sister had been learning it. And by the time I got to start the Pascal class, I think it was age 15, walk into the class and the teacher hands us this textbook, which she'd written herself. And I took this textbook home, and a day later, I walked into class and I said, here's a new textbook. She's like, what's wrong with the one you have? I said, that is the one you have. It's just corrected. Now the stuff all works. She didn't really like that much. But I could do it because I fought for the knowledge. Here's the other thing. One rule that I think that every teacher should follow is don't run code that you can't read. And this applies to all of our careers. I'll tell you a story. So again, at school, and I was a bad boy back then. And the teacher had set us a project, and she said, the project can be anything that compiles in the Pascal compiler. That was it. Those were the instructions. Wonderful. Here's the thing about Pascal. Okay. Here's the thing about Pascal. Program X, procedure Y, assembler, end. No Pascal in there, it's all assembler. But it compiles in the Pascal compiler. I knew that that teacher could not read assembler. She could read Pascal, but I'd followed her instructions. She was stupid enough to run the code. And the code had 386-byte code in it, which couldn't run on the normal lab machines. It could only run on the server, which the whole school ran on. So she ran it. Unfortunately for her, it hooked the printer interrupt. And all the code from the system that printed the reports now flowed through my code. And since I didn't like all the geeks, I inverted all the marks as they printed them. And they mailed out 1,000 reports, and every A stream student found themselves getting straight Fs. And I could do it because I knew the underlying system. And the headmaster called me in at the start of the next year, and he looks at me and goes, it was you. And I said, what was me? He goes, you know what it was. I looked at him and I said, can you prove it? He goes, no, of course I can't. I said, I guess it wasn't me, and I walked out. But here's the thing about that. I could do it because I knew how the machine worked. And so that's my final piece of career advice. Go out there and dig into the underlay. Python's great for writing scripts. It won't teach you the underlay. Your exploits you download from the internet, plenty fun. You can go scan a network, blah, blah, blah. Not going to teach you how to be a hacker. Remember, hacking is about the exploration of knowledge. You are not hacking if you are not seeking knowledge. And in the cybersecurity field, that's critical. So, just to close, this is a little bit about my experiences, and they're not the same for everybody. But there were so many lessons along the way that I would say, take the lessons. Figure out what those lessons are. In preparing this talk, I sat till 4:30 this morning trying to figure out, what are these lessons? I get asked all the time, will you mentor me? And I say, I don't know what to mentor you, because I don't know how I got here. And I really started trying to figure out how I got here. Quite an eye-opener. But be willing to take the lessons. Learn from them. Accept that they're not always easy lessons to learn. You're going to get bruised and bloodied along the way, but it's worth it at the end of the day. Chase the knowledge. Chase the skills. Learn to market yourself. If you see somebody and they've got information, remember something else. Be they a king or a queen or a president or a CEO or a CTO, just like you, they were born stark naked. Just like you, they will end up as dust. They are people. They started somewhere, they will end somewhere. go to them, find a way to talk to them, and find a way to extract what is in their heads. Have no fear of titles. In the IETF, we have a saying that says, we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We accept running code and rough consensus. Titles, meaningless. Get the information. Never stop pushing. Never stop chasing. And remember, that all the people around you, no matter what their title is, just another person, just another source of information. And yeah, so that's me, and if anybody's got any questions, please feel free. I hope that you guys got something out of it, and yeah, happy to take questions.